To assemble your LogoMouse, you will need, of course, a LogoMouse frame, your populated circuit board that's got enough stuff on it to get through movement lessons, an Arduino Nano, your power cable, 3 number 4 half-inch long thread cutting screws, 2 servo motors. I got the SM-S4303R servo motors here, a 9-volt battery, and some wheels. These are some wheels I purchased from Pololu, but you can also use a homemade wheel if you'd like. Here I have one that I printed on a 3D printer, and then I have a pretty thick rubber gasket I just put around it that works actually really well. Last but not least, you'll need a ball bearing. To start, the first thing you should do is put in the ball bearing. So nest it right there and then push down and it'll just snap into place. If you flip it over, it won't pop out. It fits in there fairly loosely. The next thing you're going to want to do is dig out your servo motors. So your servo motor has a little hardware package in it, and then the servo motor itself, at least the SMS-4303R servos do. And we actually don't need most of the hardware in the hardware package. So I'm going to pour all of this out so we can see exactly what we need here. And right here I definitely need these longer screws, and I need one of these black screws. There's usually some extra screws here, so I need 4 of these long silver screws and 1 black screw. The spare is right here, a spare of each of those is right there. The rest of this stuff I actually don't need, so I'm just going to scoot it off to the side here. And we're going to just work with getting this servo on now. And I just nest it right in here. The cable has to go through the little hole there, so if you're wondering which way the motor goes in, it's the only way where the cable comes out the back. Once the motor's in place, you're going to take one of the long screws, put it in the hole, and if you can start it by hand, that's good. If you can't, it's no big deal. Just take your screwdriver, line it up, and when you screw this, whenever you screw into plastic, especially 3D printed plastic, you need to make sure that you only go until it's snug. If you go beyond snug, then what will happen is you'll strip out the plastic, and or if it's 3D printed, there's a good chance you'll crack it. So you don't want to do too much. I'm going to do it until it's snug there, and then I stop. I don't go any further. On the other side, I'm going to get my next screw in place. Make sure you line up your screwdriver with your screw. There are 3 things that really make a big difference in how easy it is to get screws into the frame here. Number 1 is you have the right kind of screwdriver. I have one that's got a number 1 tip here. That will work well for all of the screws we need on this robot. Number 2 is you want to make sure that you're lined up. If you're not lined up with that screw, if you're at an angle, let's say if I screw like this instead of straight in, then it's just never going to work. And number 3 is you got to put some pressure on it. If you don't push in with the screwdriver, then it's just going to slip. So this screwdriver actually is so nice, but you can see if I don't put much pressure on there, it'll slip a little bit. Once you get that servo motor put in place, put your other one on. Once you have attached both servo motors to your robot, it's time to put on the wheel. You'll want to make sure that you put the wheel on so that the splines match up with those the splines on the servo motor match up with the grooves in the wheel here. You push it on until there's hardly any gap in between the motor and the wheel. A little bit hard to see there. And then use one of these little tiny screws to hold the wheel onto the servo motor. Again, this screw should just be snug. Anything more and you'll start stripping out the nylon, this nylon part right here. And I'm going to use both my hands and push these together to get the second wheel on. Now it's time to screw on the circuit board. So I'm lining up the bolt pattern on the circuit board with the bolt pattern on the robot. And you might be able to hand start these screws. If not, it's no big deal. Just hold it with your hand and line it up. When you run these screws down, make sure you don't screw them all the way down. You don't want it to be screwed tight. There needs to be a little bit of a gap between the board and the frame to accommodate the pins on the bottom of the circuit board that are sticking out. Because we didn't cut them perfectly flush, the board's going to have to stick up just a little bit, which is okay. So if we look now, you can see there's a little bit of a gap there. And if your board wiggles around on your robot a little bit, that's okay too. The next step is to put on your Arduino Nano like this. And at this point, it is imperative that you make sure that you put it on the correct way so that the USB connector comes out this way. The same side as the power cable is going to get plugged into. So both cables should get plugged into this side of the robot. Make sure you don't have your Nano reversed to the other direction. Then you should plug in your power cable. And finally, you are ready to put on your battery. So let's see here. If I hold it just like this, then I'm going to have to plug in my battery like this. Oh, I want to actually do it like that, so I had it reversed. Just like that. And if I've done everything correct, it should, the power cable should wrap around the sensor slot section here so that the power cable doesn't get in front of the sensors, and it also doesn't rub the wheel here. I can make it a little bit looser or tighter by just sliding the battery back and forth. What we have right there is perfect. Once you're done, your mouse should look something like this, or it should look just like this. To plug in your left cable, if you plug it into D6, then it'll actually make it a little easier to follow the videos. And plug the right one into D5. You don't have to do it this way, but if you know how to change the code, you can just switch those motors in code. But if you're not sure, go ahead and do it this way. The other thing you're going to want to do is coil the cable up about like that, and then just use a twist tie to hold it. There you go. You have a LogoMouse that's ready to program.